Much as I wanted to sleep in, I was startled awake at 6 a.m. by the vision of City Slicker holding a knife to Bryce's throat. My eyes popped open. I sat up. Jude was dead to the world. I thought she probably wouldn't get up for Judgment Day. I put both the regular and the decaf packets in the coffee maker, hoping for a stronger brew, and took what I got across the road and down to the beach. It was so quiet. Too dark for the birds to start up, and the ocean was calm. I could just make out the dim outline of a heron standing stock still about 15 feet out. I could see the lights of the wharf in downtown Sydney, and in the distance I could see fainter lights. I had no idea what they were. Fishing boats, Pender Island, some other island. Once again I was visited by the feeling of infinite space. I felt like I could think here. I gazed out into the vastness and I sipped my motel brew. I didn't know what to think. Here I could think anything and I couldn't think of anything to think. Never in my life, to my knowledge, had I come that close to evil. And yet we were all safe, mostly because we didn't know the danger we were in until it was all over. I just didn't know what to make of it. And Jude, her happy-go-lucky hippie live and let live attitude, had gotten Mary Lou and Bryce kidnapped by knife-wielding thugs. And when she took off with that bus, I bet she had no idea what the consequences were going to be. She probably didn't even think about it. And yet if she hadn't done that, the City Slicker wouldn't have been startled into letting go of Bryce, and Frida wouldn't have backed into him, and he'd dropped the knife, and May wouldn't have picked up the knife and ran off with it, and Bryce wouldn't have thrown himself on top of the City Slicker, and we wouldn't have found Mary Lou. And she was right. I had totally forgotten about Frida and Bryce, and I had just run after her. I guess I've always been running after her ever since that night 30-odd years ago in Champagne Charlie's. Damn the woman. She's the spice in my life. I threw the rest of the brew into the ocean, apologized to the fish and the heron, and I went back to the motel and got in bed with her. That got her attention. "Mavis, what in heaven's name are you doing?" "Getting warm. I was down by the ocean." "You got a lot of nerve," she said. "You hung me out to dry every chance you got on this trip." "Yeah, I know," I said. "I'm sorry." She rolled over and faced me. I had to rearrange myself. "You never trust that I know what I'm doing." "Well, that's just it," I said. "I don't think you do know what you're doing. But somehow it all seems to work out. You must have horseshoes up your bum." "No, Mavis, I'm in the arms of the universe. You gotta learn to trust the universe." She brushed the hair off my forehead. "Do you know how daft that sounds?" I said. I started to shake. She reached for me and held me tight. I went completely to pieces. I shook like a paint mixer. I looked for that favorite place of mine between her ear and her jaw. It was still there. I licked it. She gasped and ran her hand down my thigh. "If you think I'm going to tell you what happened next, you're nuts." Let's just say we were very happy to have a lay-in in the morning. We were snuggled up in bed together when there was a woodpeckerish knock on the door. Jude and I looked at each other, and she got up, put on her ratty flannel shirt, and went to open the door to Irene. "There you are." We looked at her. "Frida said we would be going to brunch. I don't know what her plans are, but I strongly suggest we go to the 3rd Street Cafe at 11:30. "Frida's in charge of arrangements," I said. "We just drive. My son is responsible for this charter, and you are his employees. It behooves you to know what's going on, so Excel Bus shares no liability." "That's all taken care of," said Jude. "The cops have the parties that vandalize the bus, and Clarence is submitting the bill to ICBC. Everything's covered, no sweat." "That's not what I'm talking about," said Irene. "Certain facts have come to my attention through my attendance at bingo halls in Nanaimo and Duncan." "Bingo halls? Is that where she's been? I couldn't help myself. You mean all those times you disappeared? You were playing bingo? I enjoy it, she said. And it has led me to know certain facts that you should be aware of, and I do not wish to elaborate. Be at the 3rd Street Cafe at 11:30 this morning and you can see for yourself. She pivoted on her heels and left. Jude and I looked at each other. What the hell? I got dressed and went down the hall and knocked on Frida's door. Raven answered. Frida was still in bed. Come on in, she said. I seem to be holding court from my bed. I feel like I'm lying in state. Well, I just came down to see what the brunch arrangements are, I said. We have reservations at the Pure Bistro, she said. Why? Well, we just had this very strange visit from Irene, who told us we should go to the 3rd Street Cafe at 11:30. Oh, she was here earlier and she tried to sell me the same story. But I told her that it was too late to change the reservations at the Pure Bistro because our party took up more than half their tables. And then she goes behind my back to you guys. She is a pain in the bum. We should have paid the whole price for this charter. Well, she mentioned something about company liability, which concerns her. That's all taken care of. We have the culprits, we have the police report. Well, that's what we thought too. But she says it's something else, something she found out in a bingo hall. Do you have any idea what it is? Bingo hall? Is that where she's been going all these times? Do you think she's an addict? Well, I don't know, I said, but somehow I doubt it. Frida thought a moment. Was Bunny's Bring and Frankie's pen on those guys when the police searched them last night? I don't know, I said. But I can't imagine those thugs stealing old ladies' rings and fancy pens. But then on the other hand, I couldn't imagine them chasing a music box all over Vancouver Island, especially one that plays What Child Is This? Can you call the police and check? I really have to get going. Raven, can you please bring me my sliding boards? I'll call the cops, I said, and I started toward the door. Raven, did my Thunderbird bracelet fall on the floor? Frida asked. It's not on my bedside table. I wheeled around and went back. Raven looked on the floor and under the bed. I looked in the bathroom. Then Raven went through Frida's coat pockets, and then she went through the pack on the back of the wheelchair. What about this big suitcase? I asked. There's no point, said Raven. I saw the bracelet last night when I turned out the light, and we haven't opened that suitcase since we got here. I just got it, moaned Frida. How could I have lost it already? Here's an ugly thought, I said. Maybe you didn't lose it. Who's been in your room since the last time you saw it? Frida stared at me. The manager came in last night to see if we had everything we needed. And Irene came by this morning to sell me this 3rd Street Cafe idea. And Bunny came by to talk about her bill. And you, and Raven, and me. Well, did either of you see the bracelet this morning? I asked. Frida and Raven looked at each other and shook their heads. This is horrible, Frida yelled. My Thunderbird is lost or stolen and we're way behind schedule and I'm going to have to change the arrangements because everything is so weird. I think we should go along with Irene and I'm not even out of bed and dressed yet. I can change the reservations for you, I offered. Don't worry about that. Frida lifted her head. Be sure to apologize profusely to the bistro people. Raven motored the wheelchair up next to Frida's bed and handed her the sliding boards. We'll be out of here and on the bus by 11:15, no worries. She put her arms around Frida's back and knees and swiveled her into a sitting position. I left to find a phone. First, I called the Pure Bistro and apologized on Frida's behalf and said that something unavoidable had come up. I'm sure if they met Irene, they would have agreed. They assured me they were very popular and would soon fill our tables. Then I called the 3rd Street Cafe and was able to make a reservation for 11:30 because our group was so big. By the time I got through to the cops, quoted our case number, and was connected to someone who confirmed that no diamond ring or fancy pen had been taken off the suspects when they'd been searched, It was 11:10. I hadn't even packed yet. I hurried back to the room, but Jude had already packed up everything and taken it out to the bus. Way to go, Jude. In fact, she had the ladies on the bus, and because there was no time to load the luggage, she made a deal with the manager for us to come back after brunch and collect it. If everything went well, we'd still make the 3 o'clock ferry. Frida was motoring toward the lift as Jude lowered it. It was 11:15, just like Raven said. I was beginning to feel that things were turning around for us. Then Jude told me that Bunny was missing. Really, I said. Did you look for her? Well, the receptionist said some old lady called a taxi at 10:30 and went off in it, but she didn't know the name of the old lady and she didn't know where she went. Well, we don't have time to look for her now, I said. We'll have to come back and do that when we get the luggage. Jude nodded and we got on the bus and drove the short distance to downtown Sydney. It probably would have been easier to walk to the restaurant than it was to find parking for the bus, but some of us have mobility issues, and I'm not just talking about Frida. The 3rd Street Cafe was a friendly local restaurant. They had shoved 3 tables together right near the door, so it was easy for all of us, including Frida, to get to. I went face down in the Eggs Benedict menu. I mean, what else would you get? I totally forgot why we were there until Irene leaned forward across the table and looked down at me. "You should go to the ladies' washroom," she said. It was on the tip of my tongue to say why. People were eating besides me, so I got up and I started toward the back of the restaurant. There in a shadowy corner was Bunny's fake leopard coat hanging over the back of a chair that Bunny was sitting in. Sitting across the table from her was a guy I never saw before, and he was just taking the cap off of Frankie's fancy pen. "Does it write?" he asked. "Absolutely," said Bunny, shoving a piece of cedarwood stationery across the table to him. He signed with a flourish. I stepped up to the table and whipped that stationery out from under his pen. His signature, I figured. "What are you doing?" he shouted. I turned to Bunny. "What are you doing?" I said. She was so shocked she couldn't speak. "She's selling me a collectible pen," the guy said. "Well, it doesn't belong to her." I looked down at the stationery. "So if I were you, Mr. W.R. Rollins, I'd hit the road." He looked at me, he looked at Bunny, and he got up and left. "Hey, don't forget to pay," I shouted after him. Heads turned. He looked around, took his wallet out, laid a 20 on the counter, and hustled out. I looked down at Bunny. She had folded in on herself. "Come on," I said. "We're not going to talk about this here. We'll talk about it on the bus. Come join our table." I took Frankie's pen and I stuck it in my pocket, and with the other hand I helped Bunny stand. She was shaking so bad the pom-poms on her boots were dancing. She was still in shock when she got to our table. I signaled to everyone to just act natural, which they more or less did, except for Irene, who in a twisted burst of friendliness said, "Fancy meeting you here." The waitress came up and asked Bunny if she wanted to order something, and Bunny just shook her head. May asked her why she hadn't waited for the bus to come into town, and Bunny didn't answer. The rest of the table tried to have a normal conversation, but it was sad. I mean, these are women who could be heard 3 blocks away talking to each other, and here they sounded like they were standing next to an open coffin in a funeral parlor. Frida paid the tab, and we all started out for the bus. Jude grabbed my arm and said, "What's going on?" "I'll tell you on the bus," I said. "You drive." When everybody was settled and Jude was pulling out of the parking lot, I got up and handed Frankie her pen back. Her face lit up like Ladysmith. "Oh," she said, "where did you find it?" "Do you want to tell her?" I asked Bunny. Bunny shrank in her seat. May, who was sitting next to her, turned and looked at her. I reached across May and took Bunny's purse off her lap. I swear the trolls were glaring at me. When I opened the purse, the first thing I saw was Frida's gold bracelet. I took it out and handed it to Frida, whose face was wide with shock. I rummaged around a bit and found Bunny's diamond ring under some keys. I held it out to her. "I'm guessing this is your diamond ring." "What's going on?" cried Mary Lou. There was a long pause where the only sound was Bunny Hiccup crying. Then Irene said, "She gambles." "How would you know?" snapped May. "You never even talked to her." "I watched her in the Duncan bingo hall," said Irene. "She spent $50 on pull tabs. Only an addict does that." "Well, I was so sure I would win the big one, and then all our troubles would be over and no one would need to know," Bunny said. May took her hand and patted it. "Oh, honey, pull tabs? What are your troubles?" "I'm in debt." "Well, why didn't you tell us? We would have thought of something. We're the penny pinchers," said Frida. "Don't you own your own house?" asked Frankie. "I mortgaged it, and now I can't make the monthly payments, and the bank is after me." "Oh my, this is serious," said Mary Lou. "How long has this been going on?" "Well, when Herb's dementia got so bad that I had to take over the legal signing authority on all our accounts, I realized that our monthly expenses would exhaust our savings and our pensions wouldn't cover them. I thought if I could just win the big one, the $1 million, we'd be set for life." The rest of the penny pinchers exhaled like they'd been punched in the gut. "You should have told us," said Frida. "Well, so what does all this have to do with Bunny coming into town by herself?" Jude said. I looked down at Bunny. When she didn't answer, I said, "She was meeting a man to sell Frankie's pen to him. I heard her make the date on the phone at the bingo hall," Irene added. "That doesn't make any sense," said May. "The pen's only been gone 2 days. How could this man possibly know it was for sale?" Everyone looked at Bunny and waited. "I started selling things on the internet about 10 years ago when Alan came to live with us and help with Herb. Alan's really good at computers. Whenever I had anything to sell, I would tell Alan, and he would put it on the internet and arrange for the sale. I phoned him about the pen, and he got a buyer immediately." "Well, how could you think that you were going to make a bunch of money on a fancy fountain pen?" I had to ask. Frankie spoke up. "Actually, it's quite valuable. Aurora made some special edition pens in the 60s. This one was called a Katharine Hepburn, and they gave the first pen to Miss Hepburn, and that's the one I have. I have the provenance." "Frankie, dark horse." "I never heard you mention that," said Frida. "How would Bunny know?" "Well, I think I may have told Bunny once when we were talking because she's such a big fan of Katharine Hepburn." The whole bus fell silent. Frankly, I think we were all gobsmacked. By this time, Jude was turning into the Cedarwood, and May's relatives were waiting in the parking lot to drive her to Victoria. May put her hand to her mouth and said something, again I'm guessing Mandarin. We had just enough time to use our washrooms and load the luggage. Do you want to wait and take the 5 o'clock ferry?" I asked everyone. The penny pinchers looked around at each other and once again came to an invisible decision. Frankie was the first to speak. "No, we need to make the early ferry. We can sort this all out on the bus while we wait to board." "Please, I'm so tired," cried Bunny. "Can't it wait?" May patted her hand and said, "No, it can't wait, and you'll feel better. I have to talk to my grandson." Jude turned off the ignition and opened the door. May, Mary Lou, and Frankie all left. Frida, Raven, and Irene just sat, and I asked Bryce to help Jude and I load the luggage. May came back and told us that her grandson was going to take all her Christmas presents with him to Victoria, and she was going to stay with the bus because Bunny needed her. She said she could always go over later when Bunny was more settled. Between the Cedarwood and boarding the ferry, the penny pinchers talked Bunny into going and staying with Mary Lou and Frankie for a while. Frida knew a really good credit counselor that she could set Bunny up with, and May offered to go with her to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting to see what it was like. They even decided to stop betting on poker. Then they decided that it would be too hard to play poker without betting, so May said she would teach them how to play mahjong, only not how to bet on it. Bunny was tearful and ashamed and grateful, and probably a whole much more emotions I could only guess at. When we got to the passenger deck, none of the penny pinchers wanted to eat. So Jude and I, Raven, Bryce, and Irene all went to the cafeteria. It was early for supper, but we were all starving. I mean, emotions will do that to you if they don't do the opposite. We didn't have to worry about Bryce ditching us anymore. He was clinging like a suckerfish to a whale, a very quiet suckerfish. Frankie and Mary Lou were being very gentle with him, but I had an idea that when he got home, his mother would not be so kind. Irene surprised the hell out of me by saying, "You handled Bunny well." Well, I didn't do anything except get the ball rolling, and you're the one who handed me the ball. "Give me the police report," she said. "Why?" asked Jude in a panicky voice. I was a little panicky too. "I'll deal with Sam." "Whoa, thank you, Irene." "Oh, I never thought I'd say that." I whipped that report out of my jacket pocket and I handed it to her in a nanosecond. When we got back to where we left the penny pinchers, they were all sound asleep. So Jude and I went out and stood on the deck, leaned on the rail, and looked out over the water. A heron took off from the shore and flew into the distance. I turned to Jude and said, "We solved the mysteries. We caught the bad guys. Everybody's safe. We should be celebrating. I feel like a flat tire." "Blame the knife," she said. "Damn straight," I said. "I was never so scared in my whole life." I wasn't scared till afterwards, she admitted. "Well, there is no afterwards," I said. "Now Bunny is in a heap of trouble." "Well, Bunny was in trouble before we met her, Mavis." "Yeah, but the whole thing blew up on our charter. I really didn't need this." "Well, maybe you did," she said. "Oh, don't go getting all whifty on me," I said. "If you ask me, life is just one damn thing after another." "Exactly," she said. "Got any good news?" She leaned over and kissed me.